If you're anything like me, the name parsley makes you think of parsley, sage, rosemary and thyme from Scarborough Fair. But parsley actually comes from the eastern and central Mediterranean area. It's a good source of vitamins A, C and K, along with magnesium, potassium, iron, folate and calcium. It's incredibly easy to add to your diet, and obviously you'll probably recognise it as a garnish from restaurants. However, this is a folklore podcast, not a health one. So parsley also has magical uses beyond being a source of goodness. Nicholas Culpeper associated parsley with Mercury. Parsley also has associations with everything from love to protection and even death. But how does parsley appear in magic and folklore in relation to these things? Let's find out in this week's episode of Fabulous Folklore. Hello there and welcome to Fabulous Folklore, the podcast for all things folklore, occult and just a bit weird. I'm your host, Icy Sedgwick, blogger, fantasy author and your guide into these rather mysterious realms. I've got some rare things to show you, so come on in, take a look around, but be careful not to touch anything. These things sometimes bite. Well, hello there, and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore with me, your host, Icy Sedgwick. We are actually starting a new theme this month on the podcast, because obviously we did all the legendary witches last month, which did seem to go down quite well. But this month, I thought, because of the fact that it's basically the summer and we haven't done plants for a while, I was looking at all the different kinds of plants that you can get. And I thought, you know, the one that we've never really focused on, and that's like edible plants, because there's been a lot of poisonous plants and magical plants. And I thought, let's have a look at stuff that you can actually eat. And then I thought, as a framing mechanism, we would use the parsley, sage, rosemary and thyme refrain from Scarborough Fair. So that is going to give us our plants that we're going to have a look at this month in July. Also, a few of you listening may also remember Parsley the Lion from the Herbs as well, although I must admit that one is a bit before my time. But anyway, so we are, as I say, going to have a look at parsley. Now, records actually do date back to ancient Greece and Rome for a use of parsley, which is hardly surprising given its origins in the Mediterranean, and both the Greeks and Romans associated it with death. And the Greeks actually apparently decorated tombs with parsley because it stayed green for so long after cutting it. Now, in one of their myths, it was supposed to come from the blood of Archemorus, and Archemorus was the son of Lycurgus and Eurydice. His real name was Epheltes, and Archemorus actually meant forerunner of death. Now, according to this particular myth, the 7 heroes were heading to Thebes to retake the city from the tyrannical rule of Eteocles. Now, they stopped at Nemea, and Epheltes' nurse left him to his own devices while she showed the 7 the route that they should take onwards. When she returned, she found that a serpent had killed the child. The 7 buried Epheltes and defeated the serpent, and then one of the heroes, Amphiaraus, saw this as a bad omen. So they renamed Epheltes as Archemorus, as they say, forerunner of death, and then set up the Nemean Games in his honour. Other people think that the Nemean Games were held for Zeus, much like the Olympic Games, while others say that Heracles started them after he beat the Nemean lion. And if you remember, way back in January last year, we did have a look at the legend of the Nemean lion to explain where the zodiac sign Leo comes from. Now, the Nemean Games were held every 2 years at Nemea, and originally only warriors could take part, but eventually they did open up to all Greeks. They included horse racing, wrestling, boxing, archery, chariot racing, and even music contests. Some people say that the Greeks held the Nemean Games to commemorate any deaths of important people, and that they would use parsley wreaths to crown the winners, although other writers do say that they used olive branches or celery as wreaths. Now, there are some people who will say that the plant was actually dedicated to Persephone through her role as the queen of the underworld, and these links between parsley and the dead still appear in modern witchcraft, where parsley is sometimes recommended as the herb of choice if you want to communicate with the dead. Now, there's actually a fair bit of folklore about actually growing parsley because it is infamous for its difficulty in germination. And one folklore belief actually directed people to pour boiling water over the ground before planting the seeds to ward off the devil. Growers were also directed to plant between 12 and 3 on Good Friday, because this was a period of the day in which the devil had no influence, and again, Good Friday is very much a holy day where planting's concerned. Indeed, if you are interested in various folkloric beliefs about planting and so on, I do actually have a bonus episode about it which you can get access to if you become a member of the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon. But anyway, back to parsley. It was believed to take a journey down to hell, and that was why it took so long to germinate. And we're talking like 3 or 4 weeks here, so it's definitely one of the longer in germination. But if you planted your parsley in this 3-hour window, it meant that parsley didn't need to make that particular journey because it wasn't growing to the devil. Other people think that parsley is growing down towards Persephone, not the devil, which obviously in a lot of ways makes a lot of sense given its links with Persephone in ancient Greece. Now in Shropshire, growers believed that you needed to sow parsley 9 times, and that's because the devil took all of the seeds but the last. Parsley was only supposed to be able to grow for the wicked, and I'll leave it up to you to decide what wicked people would be, although other folklore noted that it would only grow for bachelors or, and I quote, henpecked husbands, end quote, and then there's other writers who say it will only grow for pregnant people and witches. So I think that's still a fair range of people that apparently can actually grow parsley. There was a belief it couldn't be hand-sown in Maryland or Louisiana in the United States, with growers actually blowing the seeds onto the prepared beds from either a gatepost or the Bible. And in Texas, growers would scatter the seeds on the kitchen floor and then they would sweep them out onto the garden from there with a regular brush. Now, if planting parsley was difficult enough, then transplanting it was actually downright dangerous. Trying to transplant parsley was actually believed to cause deaths in the family. Some suggested that you could only transplant it safely on Good Friday. Indeed, other people who actually grow parsley will tell you it's probably a good idea not to try and transplant it at all because the plant in general just doesn't like being transplanted. So it's quite interesting that you would kill the plant if you transplanted it. So this has then given rise to this folklore that trying to transplant it would kill someone in the family. And even cutting the plant could be dangerous. So if you cut parsley while you were in love, that would kill your sweetheart. And indeed, there's also a belief that if you picked parsley while saying a particular person's name, they would die within 7 days. And that in and of itself sounds like a horror film waiting to be made, if you ask me. Finally, another superstition noted that if you spotted parsley growing in your garden that you hadn't planted, it foretold a death before the year's end. Now, despite its links with death, parsley also packs a powerful protective punch, and it's not immediately clear why, although the Romans apparently used it to protect their food from contamination, which some people think explains why it's used as a protective herb, but also as a garnish on food. Now, if you kept your livestock in barns, you could then stuff parsley into the cracks in the walls to protect your animals. In the south of France, it was recommended that you could make a tea from parsley and holy water to undo a curse. And if you wanted to ward off evil, then you could carry parsley and this would do so. Now, this is either as sprigs of the fresh herb or pinches of the dried herb. And you could also put pinches of dried parsley at your doors and windows to protect your home. And obviously, as we've looked at apotropaic stuff before, and indeed if you're interested in ways to protect your home through folklore, I do have my free guide, which you can get if you look for the link in the show notes below that says get your free guide to home protection the folklore way. Although, as always, please do make sure that you still have adequate insurance and so on as well. But ultimately, putting dried parsley across doors and windows is essentially blocking the entry points of the home. They're also what is known as liminal places because a door or a window marks that point between inside and outside. You're basically creating an opening in a solid wall by opening a door or window. And I do think that liminal quality, where it's neither one thing nor the other, links really nicely with Mercury, who was obviously the god who could travel between the divine, mortal and deathly realms. And indeed his role as a psychopomp would also help to explain some of the links with death as well. But despite these associations with death, parsley also had associations with sex and fertility, and people apparently drank parsley wine as an aphrodisiac. There was a belief in Lincolnshire that if you planted parsley, you would become pregnant before it germinated, and there was another belief that suggested that babies were actually found among parsley patches rather than cabbage patches or under the gooseberry bush. In Germany, people might wear parsley to keep their partner faithful, and dried parsley was a popular ingredient in any spells that you might work for your relationship. And there was also a simple charm that you could make to ensure your partner didn't stray. You would draw your initials entwined with theirs on a small piece of paper, and then put that with a pinch of parsley into a pouch, and then you would put that pouch into your partner's coat pocket or bag. I mean, obviously you could also just work on having a really good relationship as well, but that is indeed what the folklore said. And one simple spell actually involved mixing dried parsley with jasmine and then putting that in your shoe, and that would apparently make you more attractive to others. And there is actually a theory that the refrain in the song Scarborough Fair that actually inspired this whole series of posts is in itself a work of love magic. So if we remember, the bouquet contains parsley, sage, rosemary and thyme. Now, one translation of this suggests these meanings of the bouquet. So parsley essentially means I want to have babies with you. Sage means I'm dependable. Rosemary means remember me. And thyme means I'm yours. So obviously the idea behind the message is essentially kind of, I'm awesome, remember me, I'm yours, and I want to have babies with you, which would be a bit of a weird message to suddenly get, but that is obviously, when we've looked at things like the Victorian language of flowers, a way of using plant symbolism to send sort of quite sophisticated messages through a bouquet. And the last thing I wanted to quickly cover with parsley, which is a really strange thing that I came across, but there's actually links between parsley and the Rapunzel legend, because there's an old Italian tale named Petronella, which apparently involves parsley. And in the Italian version from the 17th century, a pregnant woman spots a patch of parsley in her neighbour's garden, and she gets an absolute craving for this parsley, despite the fact that the garden belongs to an ogress. Now, the mother keeps stealing parsley, and the ogress keeps getting annoyed that someone is stealing her herbs, and I must admit, I kind of feel like rightly so at this point. But eventually, the ogress catches the woman in the act, and the pregnant woman promises to hand over the baby to stop the ogress from killing her. Now, obviously, the woman does no such thing, and the baby grows up to be a beautiful young woman. Now, obviously, ogresses have quite good memories, so she keeps pestering the daughter to remind her mother of the promise that she made, and eventually the mother just snaps and she's like, well, go on then. So the ogress seizes Petronella, which is indeed her name, and locks her in a tower in the woods, and it has no door or stairs, only a single window. And the ogress makes Petronella drop down her really long luxurious hair if she wants to climb up to the window. Now one day the prince spots her at the window and falls in love with her, and he rocks up and basically mimics the ogress so that Petronella puts her hair down, thinks she's bringing the ogress up, and instead she brings this prince up. And eventually the ogress finds out about their trysts and the pair have to flee. Now Petronella does manage to defeat the ogress and gets her happy ever after with the prince. And if you do recognise bits of the story, it is because it went on to inspire Rapunzel. And where Rapunzel really focuses on the hair, which is important to this tale, Petronella also retains the importance of the parsley. So not only is Petronella an old word for parsley, the girl also has a parsley-shaped birthmark on her chest. And this does kind of reflect some of the medieval beliefs that things that the mother encountered, either seeing them or indeed eating them while pregnant, would then have some kind of impact on the baby. But ultimately, parsley is a wonderful herb, and in slightly less glamorous ways. Apparently you can use a parsley infusion to help prevent hair lice, and you can use a parsley poultice to help with insect bites, while other people actually recommend just simply chewing the leaves, which can help freshen the breath. Now, there are obviously lots of different uses for the dried herbs. Some of them you can just use around the home and so on, and they're easy enough to add to pouches for easy carrying, or indeed putting some under your doormat. Now obviously I'm not a herbalist, so please don't ingest anything until you know it's safe for you, because obviously if you're pregnant or indeed you're taking other medication, it can have all kinds of horrible effects because the herbs sometimes don't play well with other things that you're taking. So don't try any herbal remedies until you know that they're actually safe for you. But if you would love to learn about herbalism, then the person I would recommend is if you actually check out Rowan in Sage, and I will put the link in the show notes, because there are lots of courses available and programs that you might as well learn your herbalism from one of the best and most accessible practitioners I've certainly come across. But I would be fascinated to know what your associations are with parsley. Have you heard any of these things before? Have you tried growing it and had a really horrible time of it? Have you heard the Petronella story before? Whichever one it is, please do feel free to let me know through all the usual ways. Obviously, you can comment on the YouTube video, you can comment on the blog post, you can tweet me, whichever is easier for you, because I do like hearing what other people have associated with these different things. Obviously, you've probably already worked out what the next episode is going to be. So I'll see you next week when we get on to Sage. Cheerio. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because that helps other people find the show too. It also takes between 4 and 6 hours to research, write, record and edit these episodes, so if you want to help support my time in doing that, then you can buy me a coffee, or you can join the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon and enjoy extra benefits, including exclusive episodes and articles and even illustrated talks. All the links you need are below, and thanks in advance.